Hi, and welcome to another episode of Wellness in the Workplace. So my name is Mbali Mzinyane, and I am your host. Wellness in the Workplace is a podcast that aims to equip new and experienced professionals with the tools and insights to navigate challenging workplace dynamics. And we are wrapping up season 2 of the podcast with a final episode of our series, My Career Story. So My Career Story has been a series where we've interviewed women from different walks of life, just asking them about their career journeys, how they got to where they are today, some of the challenges they've had to overcome to get to where they are today, and some key milestones that have added to their success. And on this final episode for this season, we are chatting to an award-winning clinical psychologist and founder of JournalQ, which is a platform that's dedicated to providing mental health tools for everyday wellness. We're speaking to Asanda Madi, and we're talking all things mental health, wellness. We're talking about her journey in clinical psychology and also just her venture, JournalQ, and what it represents and symbolizes for everyday mental wellness. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. I do want to give a public disclosure that this is the second time we are recording this episode. And you've been so gracious with your time, just to come back and re-record despite our technical difficulties. So really, really appreciate you being here and appreciate the fact that we just closing off on such an important topic, and also on the last day of Mental Health Month, which is October. So I'm looking forward to our chat. But before we get into the detail of our discussion, I want to know a little bit more about you for our listeners, for our viewers, to get to know who Asanda is, where you're from, and how your upbringing has really just contributed to the woman that you are today.
Sure.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot to get through.
It's been a lot of years. But I am born and bred in Mpumalanga, Ermelo to be specific.
Yeah.
I went to boarding school in Nelspruit, also in Mpumalanga. I was raised in a typically neurotic or typically nuclear family. Mom, dad, me, and a younger brother.
Okay.
My dad passed away when I was, or rather in 2004, after being ill basically the whole year. And who left then? My mom, who was a 35-year-old widow. And I think the death of a parent in particular definitely changes the structure and functionality of a family.
Sure.
A lot of things changed after that. My childhood was good. I really started off well in this world. But there have been moments of fear. There have been moments of anger, frustration, hurt because of decisions that my parents made, obviously, as a child. But I am grateful that I was raised by educated parents who are both educators and who are also quite promoters of education themselves. They really did push us to aim high. I think I had no audacity really to go to the schools that I went to at the times that I went to. But my mom was always quite decided on the fact that school will happen, even though we need to let go of some things here, ask people for help, but school will happen. I think, at this point, I don't even think she finished paying my high school. But when I went to varsity, she didn't say, no, just take a gap year, let me figure myself out. She was just like, okay, so what's the next step? What do you want to do? And she made it happen, which is something I'm quite thankful for. I think she's quite a dreamer, which is something I've developed as well. You dream high, you dream far, and you never disbelieve that those things could be in your reality.
I love that. I love that. I was about to ask that, how do you think your childhood contributed to the women that we're seeing today? And, you touching on the fact that your mom's, I guess, belief in dreaming and dreaming big has contributed to that. But outside of that, in the day-to-day of how you navigate this world, how do you think some of the experiences from your childhood have contributed to how you show up in the world?
Well, I'm a firstborn female, so I'm definitely parentified.
Okay.
I did grow up very quickly, especially as someone who decided to go to live 3.5 hours away from home at the age of 13. So I am quite independent. My mom says I'm hyper independent.
Okay.
To the extent that she didn't really know how to even raise me as a child,
And
because I
parent
would
you.
because I would just want to do everything by myself. So there's that aspect. I think that's what comes out the most, actually. Maybe the hyper independence and being a bit parentified.
Yeah. So you're in matric now. You are deciding that you want to go to university. How do you decide what it is that you wanted to study? Had you even heard of clinical psychology before deciding that you wanted to go pursue your studies further?
It was a whirlwind. I think I took the long route. When I applied initially for university, I wanted to do computer science.
Okay.
2 weeks before I went to university, I found myself just thinking about, is this the thing that I would want to be doing in 10 years' time? Would I want to be up at 4 a.m. trying to make a program run?
Sure.
And the answer was no.
Okay.
So I frantically tried to change my degree, but at that point, obviously, I couldn't. So I still stayed within the sciences, but then I was able to chop and change my subjects. So that I was able to take psychology as an elective.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know you were able to actually do that.
You can. So I did a BSc General instead of a specific degree, similar to like a BA General or BCom General, where you do choose different majors and minors.
Yeah. And did you do this all the way up to third year?
Yes.
Okay. And then what was the decision maker for you to say, I am pursuing the psychology route? This is what I almost want to say, what I'm called to do. But I don't want to say that because I saw a post of yours recently where you said that being a psychologist is a career and not necessarily a calling. So I'll refrain from calling it that. But what made you decide that, okay, I'm sticking to this. This is the thing that I want to pursue and explore when it comes to my vocation?
Well, it can be a calling initially. However, the skills that you develop as you grow as a professional, we hope that those will help you distinguish between when it's supposed to be a career dictated move or when it's supposed to be a calling inspired move. So I do think it was a calling initially. There's certain personality traits that I have that I think did put me in a good way when it came to choosing this particular career. So I think even my educational psychologist actually had recommended that I look into this rather than what I had chosen. But after the 3-year degree, you then apply for honors. I think by the time I was doing the 3-year degree, I was sure that I wanted to be a psychologist. The kind of psychologist, maybe not so much. I didn't really even then know the options that I had, like from forensic psychology to clinical to counseling to educational, industrial psychology. I hadn't thought that far, but I definitely knew even from the 3-year degree that I wanted to do psychology. So then after that, obviously, is the honors process, which is 1 year. And I was fortunate enough to get into masters straight after, which is also a 2-year process.
So speaking of masters, I mean, we know that it is quite a competitive and stringent process to get into a master's degree, specifically for clinical psychology. So I want you to take us back to that point where you are applying, where you are preparing, and you are readying yourself to just take on this a leap of faith, but also the stringent process that could potentially even break you down to some extent psychologically. because of the level of depth and detail that is required when you do go through that process?
I didn't really prepare that much. I think I didn't want to psych myself out.
Okay.
But I did have regular debriefing throughout the week.
Okay.
So if you know anyone who's been through that process, it's a 5-day interview process. Yeah, so you go through multiple interviews, you go through role plays, you go through group activities that are also meant to give a picture of you in a group setting and how you mesh well with other people, what kind of a role you take on in group settings. So that is a 5-day, all-day process.
Sure.
And I don't really think there's much you can do to prepare yourself. I mean, you can ask around in terms of what can I do here? What should I prepare for in terms of questions I can start thinking about? But in terms of the emotional labor of that week, the stress of that week, I don't think anything can prepare you for that. But you definitely need a space where you can debrief, I think, daily. So I had a mentor that I called after every day just to speak through, this is what happened today, this is how I answered. And I think anyone who's been through an interview, you always think it went worse than you think, than it actually did. So you always going through the questions like, oh, I should have said this and I should have, no. So it was that whirlwind that whole week of I should have said this or I should have done this, or I hope that they get to ask me this so I can prove this, show this side of myself. So there's a lot of that spiraling. And then Friday comes and they let you know that you've made it in a class of 12.
So by the end of the week, it's not a matter of you waiting.
You don't spend a weekend wondering what's going to happen. No, I think that's mercy on their side.
It is. After all of that,
Exactly.
Yeah. So, I'm asking this from the perspective of somebody who could be listening in and they are contemplating on doing their master's in clinical psychology. What would you advise them on specifically for this process based on your experience? And I think having sat in a few interviews yourself, if I'm not mistaken.
I have. Well, one. I sat in my first selection process this year. I think honesty is obviously key. What the selection process is trying to do is eliminate or sort of distinguish between the wounded healers and the walking wounded.
Ooh.
So even if...
Please elaborate.
So even if terrible things have happened to you, how much have you healed from those processes? To the extent that if you yourself have lost a parent in a tragic way, would it be still triggering for you to work with someone who also lost a parent in a triggering way? Or would that your personal experience cloud you from being able to assist someone else? Your own personality, how solid your own personality structure is. Those are all the things that you're trying to distinguish. Because, I think for anyone who's been in therapy, the moments when your therapist makes it about themselves or makes you feel like you are too overwhelming for them, those are things that can be quite traumatic. But that happens when a psychologist themselves hasn't worked through certain things, where they then also make you feel like you are too much or you shouldn't feel a certain way because of their own experience. So those are the things you try to avoid. So the week-long process is trying to figure out, obviously in a group setting, we're trying to figure out if there are any personality traits that come across that maybe outline parts of you that might not work well with other masters people in your class, but also even with other patients as well in a group setting.
Interesting. So now it's the end of your master's year, and I'm assuming that you have either done or you're about to do community service. How do you then transition into a practicing clinical psychologist or a clinical psychologist in training?
There are a lot of routes to take, to be honest. I think it's about a person deciding what they want. If you want a bit of everything, I think that's the space I'm in. Where I do appreciate the academic part, but I love being a clinician as well. And I love business as well. So you try to creates a rhythm that works for you. Some people might just want to be in academia. So you apply for a sessional post, you start your PhD immediately after, and then you work towards that. Some people might want or appreciate the clinical part more, so you apply for a hospital, or you start your own private practice and you start seeing patients. Or you want both things together, so you apply for sessional posts. So those are options for people. I think it depends on what you want, the kinds of hours you want, the kind of work you see yourself doing long term, maybe not even long term, the kind of work you see yourself doing there and then. You can always change, you can always go back to things. I think that's the benefit of it. You can always go back to things. You don't really have to decide, you don't have to have a 10-year goal. But if you do see yourself as a lecturer, then you already know which way to go. If you're not sure, then try everything and see what works for you.
Now, coming back to your journey, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges that you've just had to overcome in your journey of becoming a practicing clinical psychologist?
To becoming a psychologist, sure. I think the first one is getting into masters. And once you're in masters, believing that you are meant to be there.
Sure.
That you weren't taken just because you're black or because you're female or because you're a particular age. So working through that imposter syndrome. I think for me as well, my age in particular, and even my appearance, so to say. I used to work at Bara, and I used to work at the clinics as well, and obviously the community clinics. You're seeing a lot of elderly people who are quite forward in their thinking of like, what can you tell me honestly? Like, what can you tell me about?
Like my child, or possibly my grandchild.
Exactly. Like, imagine I had an interesting case with a very old man. I think, trying to remember which ethnicity. I think it was either Zulu or Sotho. I can't remember now. With sexual dysfunction. Sure. So already it's like,
it's awkward.
What are we? And he's already feeling quite emasculated. So he's coming in and it's a power play.
Sure.
So trying to make me feel the same way he probably feels in bed. Exactly. So it's working through moments like that, because obviously some of the things he's saying are factual. I am small. I am petite. I do look very young. So I think those things as well, working through the fact that a number of patients will come in and look me down and size me up and just be like, okay. Listen, please refer me to somebody else. And that hurts.
I can imagine. And I'm about to ask you how, you avoid internalizing that, because if you're receiving that kind of feedback in different ways, in different forms, whether it's by a look or somebody, verbally expressing that, it can, I guess, affect you to some extent. So how do you try not to internalize that kind of feedback with it not affecting you in how you do your job?
It's taken a while, but I think now I do understand that I can't be everyone's therapist, and I may not work for everyone. Sure. So besides my looks and my appearance, it may also be just how I prefer to work. There are people, for example, who want you to be very direct, like, so should I leave him or not? And that's not how I work. I want us to think about why you have decided to stay with this particular partner for 5 years, and what about this person makes it hard for you to leave, and also what parts of you are so decided on the fact that this is all you deserve in life, right? Because it's not an isolated experience. Yes, it might show more with this partner that you've chosen who's quite abusive or who's not good for you, but it may be showed in the job you chose, in the work environments that you've chosen to stay in, the kinds of friends you have, the relationships you have with family members who walk all over you. So I choose to work like that, but some people really do want, like, should I leave? Should I not leave? Just tell me what's the right thing to do. And then that's it, right? Not really wanting to think further than that. So so people like that who are very solutions focused, maybe at a certain point in their life may not appreciate working with someone who wants to think holistically about their behavior and how their life has turned out. So I think now I appreciate that I won't work for everyone. But initially it hurts. It hurts, especially because, I mean, depending on the person that you're working with and the disorder that they have. If I'm working with someone with a like narcissism, for example, best be sure that the email they send to say that they're breaking up with me, or the communication they send, may be quite harsh and demeaning. So it's hard to not take it personally, but then you also understand this is the kind of person I'm working with, and they may be projecting their own fragility onto me. So I can't walk away thinking that someone who saw me for 3 sessions could make a definitive thought about me being useless, completely useless at my job. No, it takes time, but it still hurts here and there.
That brings me then to the next question about what some of the misconceptions are about, psychologists or therapists, because as you're speaking, I mean, it's bringing the human back into the psychologist and the therapist, and having to speak openly, I guess, about the hurt that could come from that kind of feedback humanizes the profession. So what are some of the misconceptions that you have heard or have picked up in your journey that people may have about clinical psychologists?
I think a lot of my teens would say, you have to listen to me, you don't care. I think that's definitely a misconception that this is just a job. I think obviously when I'm sitting listening to a tragic story, I can't stay unchanged by that. I mean, there's certain stories that you hear, especially as someone who works with children, where you see the worst of humanity, and these are things that people are doing to their own family, not even strangers, and teens will still sit with you and say something like, you don't care. And I think even some adults who have felt like no one really has prioritized them throughout their whole life will still come to therapy and still feel like, whatever, but you probably don't care anyway. So we definitely do care. I do think about my patients and my clients a lot, even outside of the therapy room, to think about the best way to help, a treatment plan, but also just what it is that they actually need from me, from life. So there's that misconception. Another misconception is that we're rich, because it is expensive. I do know therapy is expensive, but I mean, obviously there are a lot of other expenses that help me do my job. So something like my own professional development, being in supervision groups, having a supervisor to help me work through complicated cases. So we're not rich. Maybe the ones who write books at some point, the royalties from the books. But I think from just the one-on-one therapy a lot. I mean, there is a lot of money there. But we're not rich.
Interesting. Speaking of, I guess, business ventures, I want to talk about your initiative, JournalQ. Tell us about why you decided to start JournalQ, and maybe for anybody who hasn't come across your platform, what it is, and just more about the inspiration behind it.
So JournalQ is my COVID project, baby. It's a business that I started to help people practically think about their mental health on a daily basis. I think during COVID time, a lot of people were buying notebooks, and a lot of things that people had sort of pushed under the rug or swept under the rug started to surface because a lot of our coping skills were abruptly taken away. You couldn't go to gym, you couldn't go to work, you couldn't see friends. Exactly. So now there you were feeling stuck with that thought or those memories from when you were 5, when those started coming back. And for anyone who tried journaling at that time, or anyone who has journaled like avidly throughout their teen years or even adulthood, those people will realize that at some point you do feel like you're getting stuck, and you don't don't really know whether you are making progress or not. So I started JournalQ because then that is a guided journal which helps you through different mental health challenges such as grief, anxiety, whatever the case may be, even if you just want to reflect about your life in general. So you have guided prompts that sort of serve as a masterclass to work you through particular phases of your life. And that's how it started. I think generally journaling is it's a reflective tool, it's an organizational tool, it's an expressive tool as well. You need to reflect on your feelings, you need to be able to express your feelings for any viable relationship, but you also need to be able to organize your thoughts and your feelings in a way that makes sense for you so you can manage them better.
And what has your experience been since you've started the platform? Obviously, you created it with the intention for it to be consumed, but I can imagine in the process of the creating and of just interacting with people that consume the journals, that can affect you in some way or leave an impression, positive or otherwise. So tell us about your experience has been since you've ventured into this, I guess as a business person, but also more around like your work as a therapist.
I think on the business side, I've definitely learned a lot, and it's something I've appreciated. I think with the fatigue that I've been feeling recently, I've appreciated the different side of life that I wasn't really trained to do. So the business side, the marketing side, the creativity that comes with that, it definitely pulls me away from my day-to-day thinking, which I have appreciated. In terms of the journals, I mean, the feedback we've received from people who have used them quite well, especially our grief journal. I think maybe let me speak on that one. But the grief and the anxiety journal, I've had people in tears just from looking at it, not even having used it yet. I had someone say the grief journal in particular was her lifeline on her most worst days. So I definitely appreciate that I have been able to make psychology accessible in that sense. Grief is consuming, anxiety is all consuming as well. So if for people to have tools that can help them work through those feelings in a way that reduces the severity and the intensity enough for you to function and to think about your patterns. I've loved being a part of that. It's bigger than me. That's what I've realized.
Oh, I love that. And you've touched on 2 specific journals. I know you've also got a gratitude journal, and then there are some other complementary products. Do you maybe want to take us through just your range of products and the different types of journals and potentially even the complementary aspects that you have to accompany the journals?
So in terms of our product offering, we have the gratitude journal, like you've said, daily activities for you to try out. I think with that one, we're trying to make gratitude practical. Right?
I have that one and I love it.
I think people always think that the positive me will be completely different from me somewhere in the future. But I think we try to make sure that even today, from doing good for someone else or thinking about loved ones, you are able to still have that or develop that positive mindset even today. Then we have the Inside Out journal. I think that is more of a reflective one. If anyone is in a phase of their life where they're thinking, okay, like how do all the dots connect? Where do I come from? Who am I now? And where do I want to go? And also who are the kinds of people that I want to be with me in the future with the life that I'm creating for myself. We have all the journals that we are reworking. So I have journals for little kiddies to help develop their emotional vocabulary. I think a lot of parents will just say it's hard to access kids at a certain age. There's a certain age where you just want them to keep quiet because they're like talking so much about like how their day was and where they went. And then there's a moment where they keep quiet. You ask them how their day was and they're like, fine. How are you doing? Fine. How was school? Okay. So I think a lot of parents struggle with that adjustment, and obviously for kids, it's about learning, like, what are feelings?
Yes.
What do I say about the kids who didn't want to play with me on the playground? That's a feeling, right? I felt left out, or I felt hurt. So there's that one. Then there's the anxiety one. There's also a grief one that I've spoken about. We are trying to add on more accessories. So we have feelings wheels to help you decide and sort of find a label for what you are feeling, right? If you label it correctly, you're able to manage it more effectively.
Sure.
And then there's other products that we will be releasing, hopefully February, for the relationships.
Interesting. So how do you start journaling? I think a lot of people who may have not dabbled into it don't know how to start, because it can be, I guess, a bit intimidating. So what would you then advise as a starting point to develop that practice and that habit of writing your thoughts, your feelings, and your experiences down?
I think you start by starting.
Okay.
You get a blank piece of paper and you start writing. Common pitfalls would be that your thoughts sort of race, and it's hard to pin the thoughts down because they're moving faster than your hand. So a lot of people then become flustered with that. Sometimes you feel blank, or you just feel stuck because you're not sure how to expand on certain experiences or thoughts or feelings. But I think or rather what I would advise is to start. You find your rhythm as the frequency increases. And you try to not censor yourself, so to not judge yourself. Sometimes the thoughts come out as you're writing, and you're like, whoa, I didn't know I felt like that.
Those intrusive thoughts.
Exactly. I didn't know that was there. So you try to not judge it and be like, oh no, I definitely can't feel like this to my mom. I have to be grateful because she's done so much for me. But then there's like repressed anger that you actually haven't even given yourself time to think about. That may come up if you just free associate. Just whatever comes out, do not censor it, write it down as long as it takes. As long as your hand is not cramping. You just write it down. I think that's the best way to start. After a while, you can look back at that and see what patterns have come up. Then you get to sort of see what you can reduce from that, or deduce from what you've written.
And more, I guess, in the professional sense, how do you think journaling rather can help you, improve your personal and your professional life, and also more specifically around the emotional intelligence that one would need to navigate a workplace? What role does journaling play in that?
Well, I mean, I think like I've said, it is an organizational tool. It's a tool that's an expressive tool. It's also a reflective tool. So I definitely think we can't take for granted your ability to be able to think about your own experiences. Express those experiences to someone else and be able to organize it for yourself. So I think there's that, because if you think about it, in our day-to-day life, there are certain things that are priorities because we need to survive. Jobs, certain relationships, certain responsibilities that take precedence. But how many people on a day-to-day basis get to check in with themselves and just see, like, by the time 9 a.m. hit, I was almost involved in an accident. I got into a fight with a taxi driver on the road. My head of department didn't want to hear me out with my business idea. The bank sent me a scary SMS, or SARS sent me a scary SMS. And that's all happened between 9. But you're in a very fast-paced world where we don't have time to really digest. You're always taking things in, but we don't chew, we don't swallow, and we definitely don't digest. So I think there's something about being able to slow down long enough for the experiences you have to actually impact you in a positive way, in a mindful way.
Yeah.
But that's not something we are afforded, and that's not something we give ourselves time for as well, because must be food that must be cooked. There must be whatever else that needs to be done, deadlines that take precedence over the fact that, should I really think about how that whole interaction with that taxi driver actually affected me? Because maybe you were shaking for the next 2 hours and you weren't even aware of that because you were so scared.
Sure.
So I think it definitely helps you to slow down, because a lot of us don't have that. We don't have that space.
I think another thing as you were talking that came up for me is just how it helps with self-regulation. So regulating your emotions, and that is such an important component of emotional intelligence, specifically within the workplace. I mean, if you're moving like from one meeting to another, one screaming match, from one client to another, it can affect, I guess, your emotional state. And it is important, like you said, to then slow down and reflect back on, how does this make me feel? And also empower you for the next time that you interact with that client, with that stakeholder, and how you can manage that situation.
So, I mean, with something like that, sorry to...
No, it's okay. It's okay.
So you'd find that you wouldn't really assess how much those back-to-back meetings with pure aggression had impacted you until at night when you're trying to sleep.
Sure.
When you realize that I'm actually quite wired up.
Sure.
And I've been wired up from back-to-back meetings where I've had to fight and I had to be hyper-vigilant the whole time. And now my body can't calm down long enough for me to fall asleep because I'm still wired up. There's still that sense of hyper-arousal. So what would calm you down? I mean, people have different things that they use to help them sleep, but no one would actually think, okay, let me think about my day. It's just, I'm so frustrated that I can't sleep and I can't sleep, and you try various things to help you sleep, but not even thinking about, okay, maybe I'm struggling to sleep because those 5 meetings, one in particular, really set me off. Because I feel like I've just been on edge the whole day.
And journaling then gives you then that space, right?
Exactly.
To be able to process that stimulus and arrive at a point where I guess you can even get to have a healthier response to situations like that without it being an impact or affecting you in future. So yeah. I think journaling, as somebody who does it, helps me in that regard, and that's why I guess I was able to just add a bit more color to that. So anybody who's listening and would like to get themselves a copy of your journal, where can they find it? How much is it, if you're able to share that? And where can we follow you also on social media?
So we currently have the Inside Out Journal, which is the transformation sort of reflective journal, and the gratitude journal available. Those are both $4.50. We had a sale this month, but it's the last day of the month. There probably will be like a Black Friday one or a festive holiday sale as well, but they're currently going for $4.50.
Okay. And where can we find them? Is there a website? Can we order from your Instagram page? How do we get in contact with you to get a copy?
So if you go on our Instagram page, if you go to our profile, you can click on the link and that will lead you to our website. But you can also go straight to the website, which is www.journalq.co.za.
And the Instagram page is?
JournalQ, @journal_Q.
Okay. And in closing, as a wellness practitioner yourself, what does wellness mean to you? And specifically at this time of the year where people are struggling with year-end fatigue and burnout and anticipating the festive season for some rest and recuperation. What does wellness mean for you? But also, what can wellness look like as you try to slow things down and to rest and recuperate after a long and stressful year?
So wellness for me is a well-integrated system. So you are factoring in your emotional, mental, social, physical capacities, and none of those capacities are neglected.
Sure.
Integrating all of that, right? So I think one can't exist without the other. So you can't be a well person if physically you are sick or unhealthy. And you can't be a well person if you have no healthy relationship to account for. So I think for me, it's about that. And at this time of the year, it's about knowing what needs to take a back seat and what do I need to optimize in order for me to be well, keeping these 4 components in mind. So work might be picking up because maybe it's just end of the year wrap up time, but something that helps you keep sane in terms of work is exercise. So you amp up those, and you may say, okay, in terms of friends and socializing, maybe that can decrease a bit. And in terms of emotional wellness, I make sure that the socializing I'm doing and the friends that I am interacting with are those that actually fuel me emotionally, and people that are sounding boards for me. So you just strategize in terms of where you are prioritizing the most time and effort, but keeping in mind that all of these components do need to be factored in. You can't then say, okay, I'm just going to focus on work. As soon as December hits, then I can focus on everything else. Doesn't work like that.
Sure. And it does sound like continuous self-examination or reflection of where else you can, plug in, increase, decrease, and to just be more well integrated, as you say, so that you show up better for yourself. Asanda, thank you so much. Thank you once again. I said at the beginning of this recording, that this was our second take. And I think it is a second because it is also better than possibly the first one. So thank you for your time. Thank you just for your insight. And thank you for listening. If you have been tuned in to season 2 of Wellness in the Workplace, thank you so much for being so loyal. It has been quite a long season. We've had quite a number of guests on the podcast. Started off with a whole series around the HR perspective with Winnie Dunster at the beginning of the year, and then picked up with this series, My Career Story, and we're closing it out for the year. Thank you so much for your continued support on the socials, on the podcast, on YouTube. If you're subscribed, you're a listener, thank you so much. My name is Mbali Mzinyane, and I will catch you on the next season of Wellness in the Workplace. Take care.